people keep saying, "Oh, I don't see another loss in the schedule." It's not realistic to make that prediction. Is it realistic for Ohio State? Well, obviously not this year because they already lost, but typically you can make that prediction for an Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson. But like you said, Mark, there are going to be games because Iowa does not tout out or bring out 4 and 5-star guys at every position. There are going to be games where Iowa just has an off day, can't move the ball. I mean, they've already had that 2 games in a row. You wonder what would have happened these first 2 games had Iowa not, had Iowa's cornerbacks dropped those interceptions. I mean, I know that's a huge game of what if, but as far as the numbers, if you look at the numbers from Saturday, Iowa State outgained Iowa. They had a better average per play than Iowa. Turnovers decide that is the biggest indicator of wins and losses is turnover margin in college football. So if Iowa can continue to do that, they're going to win a lot of games. But I think that's, again, to go back to the big question is, can they sustain that? And I just don't know at this point.
Yeah, I would have to go through year to year and see the interception or the turnover leader in college football defensively and what that number typically is over the course of 12 games. I got to think that they're ahead of that pace. Therefore, most likely it's going to slow down to some extent. Now, let it slow down against Colorado State or whomever. But then again, you're more likely to get turnovers against the lesser teams, although they turned over 2 really good opponents these first 2 weeks of the season. And there is a luck factor to turnovers. I'm going to make an estimation that's not based on, it can't be statistically proven, but I think it's reasonable to think it has been proven to a certain extent that there is a luck factor with turnovers in football. I would think that that's maybe 20 to 30% of the equation. And the rest of it is if you hit hard, if you can catch the football in the secondary, to Corey's point, because a lot of defensive backs don't and have those kind of ball skills, then you're going to, we're talking about, I believe, a program that has, I don't know if this is the exact number. I saw a number this week over the last, it's a 20 to 25 year statistic about, I thought it was about turnovers, and I thought Ohio State was extremely high, and Iowa was as well.
Well, that wouldn't
remember what that number was.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me, and that's credit to Phil Parker. He's being a former defensive backs position coach. You just can count on Iowa turning teams over. I mean, year in and year out. The difference with, again, I go back to the difference with this team is my major complaint has been Iowa typically brings out a particular cornerback and he takes this side, the wide side of the field, and this guy's got the short side of the field. This year, it doesn't matter if you line up, and I think if in past years, Alan Lazard or Rondale Moore on the opposite side of the field, because you've got a cornerback who you would almost consider an equal to the other cornerback to be able to take that side. That's the big thing. I just don't remember a year where Iowa's had 2 really stellar corners. I mean, the Desmond King 2015, that was a solid secondary, but they also went undefeated. So, but that was Desmond King and Greg Maben, and Maben ended up playing a little bit in the NFL. I don't know if he's still on an active roster, but that was a good tandem. But most years you've got, a Josh Jackson and then whoever's across from him, or Michael Ojemudia and whoever's across from him. Same even going back to Amari Spivey. I think Sean Prater was the opposite corner in a couple of those years, but he was okay. This is a unique year from that perspective, and we've seen the results. Lots of turnovers, and again, I think this linebacker core was just completely underrated. And boy, I got to give again shout out to the defensive line. That what they did on Saturday, again, not only getting in the backfield, but we saw Iowa get their hands on a lot of balls. And the second interception for Matt Hankins was a tipped pass. I believe the one to Benson was actually deflected off an Iowa State player. But it's just it's the fundamentals that Iowa's line is just going to always possess because of who their coordinator is. They're going to get up for balls. They're going to, if it comes their way, they're going to catch it. And so then when you add in the fact that there's not really a perceivable weakness on this defense, I think it's going to result in a lot of turnovers. So if I had to make a prediction, it's not like you said. It's probably there's just no way it's going to be able to sustain itself to where Iowa's, like Iowa State beating them in turnover margin by 4 every game. But they're going to be able to continue to get. I would not be surprised to see Iowa lead the country, or at least lead Power 5 teams in turnovers by the end of the year. I mean, they've already got a huge head start, and again, it's been against 2, at least what we thought to be really solid quarterbacks.
What's not sustainable is to average 1.5 scores per game by the defense.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, here's one thing we haven't talked about as to why that's happened. At least on Saturday. Yes, Justin Jacobs forced that fumble. Yes, Jack Campbell scooped it, and he was only 5 yards out. But the reason they were that close was because of one man, and that's Tory Taylor. I mean, this guy is punting out of his mind. And again, we don't want to talk about punters. That the reality is, Tory Taylor is on his way to being, I think, the best punter in the Kirk Ferentz era. Obviously, Reggie Roby is probably the best punter in Iowa history. So wouldn't put Tory on that level yet. But what Tory's been able to figure out, and Don Patterson and I have had these conversations, is he's figured out how to punt the traditional American style of punt, which is not always something that Australian punters can learn. Michael Sleep Dalton was a guy who had transferred to Iowa from Arizona State and was originally from Australia. He never was great at the traditional punt. He had a good punting average, but again, most of that came rugby style. And right now, Tory Taylor is punting like an American punter, and it's really impressive. I mean, the guy had, I think, he had like a 69-yard punt on Saturday. And if you look at the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but you look at the starting field position average for each team, Iowa State was consistently, I mean, inside their own 15, I mean, throughout that entire game. And that's credit to Tory. I mean, Iowa's offense, even when they were struggling to move the ball, they were getting the ball, midfield or at their own 40, whereas Iowa State's starting at their own 10, their own 5, their own 20. That's it. That's huge. And so a play like that, where you force a turnover, yeah, that puts you in a position to score and capitalize right away. And so in a way, I think it, again, is it completely sustainable? No, but you have a great punter right now. You have a very good punt returner, which helps things as far as field position, and you have a stellar defense all around. And maybe this is not a fair question. Maybe you don't like this question, Mark, but if you had to pick, if say Iowa and Iowa State played this Saturday, would you care to throw out a predictive score for that game as of right now?
I think those concerns on defense are real. I don't think it's just a matter of, okay, we've just got so much talent, we can pretty much do whatever we want. How much Iowa would be able to take advantage of that versus what Oregon did? I think that if they play at a neutral site, that Iowa, I would feel more confident about Iowa's performance. I would feel more sure of what Iowa was going to bring to that game versus Ohio State. And with a young starting quarterback who's making some mistakes for Ohio State, I would give. I would think it would be. I would have never said this 2 weeks ago. A bit of a toss-up game.
Wow,
a very intriguing matchup, just because Iowa playing as good a football as they are, and because the characteristics of the teams being so different. I think the Big Ten Network must have said it 800 times because it just stuck in my brain that Iowa produced, 173 yards of total offense on Saturday, and Ohio State had 612. And who won the football game?
Yeah. As for some reason, as you were talking, I kind of thought back to basketball season. And I'm only going to bring this up because I know a lot of Iowa fans on here who are passionate about football are also passionate about basketball. The past several years, I mean, even looking back at the whatever year Iowa had the losing season, I think it was like 2018, whatever the case. Throughout the past 3 to 4 years, Iowa basketball has been consistently top 5 nationally in total offense. This past year, I mean, it was Gonzaga and Iowa most of the year. If you look at Ken Palm's ratings, they were basically number 1 and number 2 throughout the entire year. The problem was they couldn't play a lick of defense. And we kept saying this past season, as Iowa was a top 5 team preseason, we kept saying, how good does Iowa's defense need to be? Because their offense is just incredible. And they had times where they played okay defensively. But then you look at reality, and the reality is Iowa got to the tournament and got pretty much their pants pulled down against Oregon in the round of 32. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen to football, but you can't have, you would know the numbers better than me, Mark, but I from what I know, you cannot, I don't care if it's football, basketball, you cannot have one side of the football that you are absolutely abysmal and expect the other side to be elite enough to make up for that. I just don't think that's how it works. And that's why I've said with Iowa basketball for several years, they don't have to be great. They just have to be decent. And they haven't been decent. They were decent at times last year, but they weren't decent consistently. This Iowa offense so far has not been decent. It's been poor. So again, competition plays into it. That's why I'm not trying to just sound the alarm. Competition plays into this, and they've got an opportunity these next 2 weeks to fix some things.
Corey, you've brought up 2015 a few times, and in response to many of the comments about Iowa going undefeated and just the probability that, that's a long shot. How would you compare? And if I remember that 2015 team correctly, they did benefit from a pretty light Big Ten Eastern Division schedule.
Yeah, let's see if I can. That would have been, was 15. 15 was still the 8-game schedule, correct?
Yep,
8-game conference. Excuse me.
Yep.
So crossovers that year, if I can recall, in 15 was, I believe, Indiana and Maryland, because there were only 2 crossovers. Is that right?
I will find out here
with the 8-game schedule. It has to be, because the 6 other teams in the Big Ten West. Indiana and Maryland were not. Neither one of those teams were setting the world on fire that year. So you're right. As far as I don't know if this is where you were going with that. If you want me to compare, or you kind of wanted me to compare these 2 teams?
Absolutely.
Well, the 2015 team was better offensively, at least to this point. They had a quarterback in CJ Beathard that could scramble. They don't have that in Spencer Petras. They had a quarterback in CJ Beathard who was very capable at getting the ball downfield. I thought went through his progressions well, usually made the right read on receivers, and didn't turn the ball over too much. I don't know how many turnovers he had in 2015. I think statistically he had a better year in 16, even though Iowa did not as a whole as far as the turnover numbers. But the defense is better this year. I'm trying to think. 15, that was obviously Josie Jewell was anchoring that linebacking core, so it was a good defense. That was Jewell and Bauer, Bo Bauer, and Ben Neiman. That was a good defense. Desmond King and Greg Maben were at the corner spots. This is a better team. It's better defense, excuse me. The offense is going to have to catch up. But you're right. They benefited from a very pedestrian conference schedule. And, they were fortunate to beat Iowa State that year in Ames. That was a game where it felt like Iowa State was going to win. They were fortunate to beat Pittsburgh. I mean, they kicked a 57-yard field goal in the final seconds of that game to win that one. So they benefited from a favorable schedule. Iowa doesn't ever, when they have great seasons, and we're talking, 2000, 2002, 2004, 2015, and 2009, I would say, they have to win close games. So oftentimes it comes down to, okay, are you going to be 8-4, 9-3? Or are you going to be, 10-2, 11-1? It comes down to, how do you perform in close games? We don't know how Iowa's going to play in close games because they haven't had a close game yet. I wouldn't want to bet on the offense to make a 2-minute drive down the field to win a game. I can tell you that. I'm certainly confident in Caleb Shudak at place kicker, but he had a bad snap from Austin Spiewak on Saturday at long snapper. That's kind of a rare thing to see at Iowa. Typically, I don't remember the last time Iowa's had a bad snap, and that cost him a field goal on Saturday. So, those are things that are valid to bring up. But we'll see. I mean, I think the close game comparison is going to be one that is still to be determined. The offense has to catch up, and the biggest thing with the offense, obviously, we're talking about the offensive line. I think will help Petrus, but quarterback play is the biggest thing there. I like Spencer a lot. I think he's a really nice kid. I think he's a mature kid. I want nothing more for him than to set the world on fire and start making plays like he made in the second quarter to Charlie Jones in that drive. That was a beautiful drive and a beautiful throw. And it felt good as an Iowa guy to watch it, because you root for this kid. You hear all the outside noise of people telling him that he needs to be benched, he sucks, and all this stuff that doesn't help anything. It's just it just makes you look like a fool, in my opinion. And to see him make plays like he did in the second quarter was tremendous. So I want him to succeed. But if you had to ask me who would I rather, CJ Beathard or Spencer Petras, I'd have to take Beathard at this point. I think it's a valid conversation. It's probably not a reasonable conversation, but it's valid to ask the question, if Iowa did have CJ Beathard this year, how good could this team be? I think sky would be the limit for this team, because, again, the defense is that good. The difference between two teams, as far as in something in favor of this team, is in 2015 there was not an elite. There was no elite position. Linebacker, you could make an argument, was elite because of Josie, but this defensive unit, I think the entire unit is elite now. So that's a, I don't know. Again, I don't know how you compare those teams, but that's one thing that 2015 did not have. The schedule, I've said all along, is somewhat favorable, because you don't get Ohio State and you don't get Michigan, who's better. And I'm not surprised they're better. They're better than they were last year. Penn State's better as well, but it's sort of similar. And again, you do get a favorable schedule. I think if Iowa were to go 12-0, it's a better resume than 2015, because the schedule is tougher. Again, I think the only ranked team, if I recall, that year, 2015, I think was Wisconsin, for the regular season. I don't know if you have that in front of you, Mark, but
I did a few minutes ago, and then I pulled it back. Wisconsin finished 10-3. That was a 10-6 win over Wisconsin, so that must have been it. Pitt was an 8-5 team. Minnesota was a close game at 40-35, but they finished at 6-7.
Nebraska wasn't anything. I don't know what Patty Fitz did that year. Oh, they were ranked. Northwestern
finished 10-3. Yes.
Right. That's right. And that was an impressive win for that 2015 team at Northwestern, because that was a highly hyped game, and I believe it was 40-10, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
So I'm not the only one you're not the only one who can recite scores here, Mark. Let me try to keep up with you. But no, that was an impressive win. So they did have a couple. But already, I mean, you could argue these first two wins, I think most people would say Indiana at home, number 17 in the country, and then preseason number 7 on the road, Iowa State. I would already put those two wins a notch above the Wisconsin Northwestern wins in 2015. So, we had this discussion, and I don't want to open this can of worms completely, Mark, but we had this discussion a week or two ago. I don't remember which live it was that we talked about this, but I had made the comment that I didn't think an 11-1 team, Iowa team, would make the playoff. And I really don't know where to go with that conversation. But my question to you, as a college football savant as you are, what does an Iowa team that were to lose to Ohio State in the college football, in the Big Ten championship, do you think, are you in a position, again, I know a lot can happen, but are you in a position to say that Iowa would make the playoff at, what would that make them, 12-1 with a championship loss? I mean, that's a valid conversation. If people want to talk about Iowa running the table, could you afford a loss to Ohio State and still make the playoff?
It's a valid conversation if these teams are being evaluated the way I would like to see them evaluated. And I know that part of that evaluation is based on the resume, but there's this large component there that is the eyeball test that is not going to work in Iowa's favor, at least not if they continue to win games as they have. For some reason, people are more impressed with 48-45 games than they are 17-14 games, even though if you're just taking an evaluation of the offense and the defense based on the score, then the same concerns that you should have for the 48-45 game can be applied to the 17-14 game, just on the other side of the ball. But for some reason, they don't seem to get applied that way. We've not seen a team lose a conference championship game during the playoff era and make the playoff.
How many undefeated? Do you know off the top of your head how many undefeated teams there were that lost their conference championship and then missed out on the playoff? Have there been any?
Wisconsin in 2017 was 13-0, lost to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game.
12-0 or 13-0?
I'm sorry, they finished 13-1. Yes, 12-0. That is the only one that comes to mind. I'm pretty good at this, that I'd be able to come up with the other team that lost as an undefeated team going into a conference championship game. It has not happened other than that one occurrence. Yes, in 2017.
Yeah, and
Iowa, of course, in 2015.
Oh, that's true. That's true. What are we talking about? Yeah, and you know what's weird about that is we knew. I mean, we Iowa fans knew when LJ Scott stretched that ball over the goal line. We knew it was over, and that's what's. I agree with you. Do I think Iowa was one of the 4 best teams in the country that year? Absolutely not. I don't. But we're talking about resume, which is what you base your poll on, and I believe that's what we should be basing everything on. We don't base things on, well, again, that's what the AP. That's why I don't like the fact we have preseason polls, and I think you would probably agree with that. There's no point to having a preseason poll because then they influence the rest of the season polls, which, I mean, it does nothing but waste people's time and waste people's energy. But, anyways, you're right. 2015, yeah, and if I recall, again, you're going to be able to tell me this, but there was something that happened in the Clemson North Carolina game that same night as the Iowa-Michigan State game in 2015. Wasn't there an offsides penalty on an onside kick that was not called? Had it been called, it would have changed the result of that game, and there was a good chance Iowa would have still gotten in. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Well, it would have given North Carolina the potential of defeating Clemson. So Clemson was an undefeated team regular season. They won that game. Here you go for scores, even outside the Big Ten, 45-37. So they won an 8-point game. That would have given North Carolina the ball with a chance to score a game-tying touchdown, 2-point conversions, and still having to play overtime. So it's a bit of a stretch. So it wouldn't have resulted in a win, but the opportunity to win the game.
So in your opinion, again, I know you don't agree with how the playoff committee and their criteria completely, but had the results of that ACC championship game changed, would Iowa have made it? Would they have made it with a 12-1 record and a loss to Michigan State?
I'd have to look at the rest of the field. You know who would have gotten a lot of play, who I do think was one of the 4 best teams in the country. I actually think they were the best team in the country, and I understand I'm biased, is Ohio State. They lost on the last play of the game to Michigan State as a huge favorite. They were consensus number 1 the entire season until 10-0, playing Michigan State, lost the game on a last-second field goal, 17-14. Of course, because of the tie, did not go to the Big Ten championship game. It's really, you talk about fortunate. Michigan State certainly earned the position, and I sat here, as I typically do now, trying to differentiate between who I think are better teams versus who earned it. And I simply said, I believe Ohio State's one of the 4 best teams in the country, but they did not earn a playoff spot. Should not have been selected for the playoff, even though, your NFL types are like, look at their roster. They should be in the playoff. They didn't earn it. Now, Michigan State was mighty fortunate that year. They had that game against Ohio State, which they, again, earned. But that was the same year, if you recall, the game Michigan State won at Michigan at the Big House, in which all Michigan had to do was secure the snap on a punt to win the game.
Sean McDonough. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I remember that was
And we're not
Jake.
even talking about being able to punt the ball. He didn't even need to punt the ball. He could have just fallen on the ball. The
Right.
game was over. There were double
And
zeros
then
on
all
the
you have to
clock.
do is tackle him before he gets to the goal line, and nobody could tackle him before he gets to the goal line. And that was the Jake Rudock year.
Yeah. So the Michigan punter whirled around and threw the ball like up in the air over his head. Why? Yeah.
Oh, he has trouble. Yeah, I remember that. That is one of the. Now, I will say, I felt sorry for Michigan fans. I don't know if you feel sorry for Michigan fans ever, Mark, but some of the pictures, the ESPN shots from the crowd were so. I mean, those are the iconic moments that I remember of this era of college football.
Well, what's ironic about that, if you're an Ohio State fan, is the typical Ohio State fan was laughing that night at that game because of Michigan's unfortunate. But that game, that play knocked Ohio State out of the Big Ten championship, most likely a playoff spot.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't want to. We could talk about 2015 for forever. I sound like a salty fan, but Michigan State, I probably didn't deserve to win that Iowa game.
Oh yeah,
because not only because you have an 8-minute drive where Cook converts at least 1 or 2 fourth downs by just millimeters. There was also a play earlier in that game, and it never really got talked about. I don't ever remember hearing it on any post-game shows or coverage at all. There was a play in that game, and I don't remember who the Michigan State defender was, but it was a pass from CJ into the end zone. It would have been a touchdown to George Kittle. Kittle gets blown up, helmet-to-helmet contact, and I have issues with the modern day targeting rules as well. But if we're talking about the rule, it was clearly targeting. Helmet to helmet. The ball pops up. It lands on Kittle's back, and it's recovered by Michigan State. It's called an interception. Never was called targeting. Had that play, it would have been, I think it was 3rd down, but you call that targeting. And then you have like 1st and goal at the 2.
Sure.
Would have completely changed that game. I know it's all woulda, coulda, shoulda. But I remember that, and now, with that being said, the playoff game, and you can look up the highlights on that, but the playoff game, I don't want to know what would have happened because I saw what happened with Michigan State and Alabama that year. I mean, I don't think it could have been anywhere. I had somebody sparked this argument with me the other day, a good friend of mine, and maybe we get some comments here in the chat, Mark. But somebody asked me, would you rather, and I was surprised by his comment, but he asked me, would you rather go to the Rose Bowl, assuming the Rose Bowl is not part of the 14 playoff. Would you rather go to the Rose Bowl and win or go to the playoff and lose? Or not even the Rose Bowl, whatever, New Year's Six Bowl it is. Would you rather go to a New Year's Six Bowl and lose and win, or go to a playoff game and lose? And my first response was, I'd much rather go to the playoff and lose. And his response was, no, I'd much rather win a New Year's Six Bowl. So I'd be interested to know what Iowa fans say on this, because I thought it was obvious that you'd rather go to in that year, 2015, it didn't really matter because Iowa got destroyed by Christian McCaffrey and Stanford anyway. So you're going to get destroyed by Stanford, might as well get destroyed by Alabama in the playoff. But it is a valid argument to be had. I just have never dreamed of a scenario where you'd rather win a non-playoff game or non-playoff bowl game than actually make the playoff.